Welcome to the BVTV network, coming from the UK studios of BizVision. I'm your host, Malcolm Gallagher. Now, there are certain times in your life when you can remember where you were at the time of a momentous occasion. For some, it may be President Kennedy's assassination. For UK people, it may be Princess Diana's death. But I can vividly remember where I was when the Twin Towers fell to the ground on the 11th of September, 20 years ago this year. We must never forget the sad loss of life and the many devastating impacts that caused. But also, we must ask ourselves, what has happened since then? Has the world moved on? How was the story told by the media on 9/11 and afterwards? What can we learn from the media's coverage on that day? To bring us those answers, I've got my own scoop, if that's the word. He's a Pulitzer Prize-nominated former reporter and columnist for the Wall Street Journal, and author of the new book, September 12th, An American Comeback Story. Let's go to Denver, Colorado, and meet Dean Rotbart. Hello, Dean.
Hello, Malcolm. It is a delight to be with you on BVTV and the BVTV network. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I said it's my scoop, isn't it? You know, nobody else has got that, and nobody else. I love your house to the left behind there. A lot of snow to clear, though, isn't there?
Some people call it the White House. I call it home.
Oh, right. Okay, I've got that now.
So,
more acceptable.
Here's the Denver skyline, Denver, Colorado.
Ah, brilliant!
Beautiful, mile-high city.
Yeah,
great place for tourists if we can get past the coronavirus restrictions. Everybody ought to come out and visit.
I believe I've talked to lots of people in Denver and Colorado during these BVTV, and they'll keep extolling the virtues of it. Nice climate, I believe.
Most of the time. It has been incredibly hot of late. It is, and so that's been a little bit tougher. And there are a lot of wildfires, both in Colorado and in the west, on the West Coast, etc. And so the air here has been not so nice lately, but in general, beautiful year round.
Excellent. Okay. Dean, this September marks a concerning 20 years since that dreadful day. It was a day that, as you say, the business financial reporters of the Wall Street Journal were suddenly called on to be war correspondents. Viewers and listeners, I'll be talking to Dean in three parts. In part one, I want to ask him what the aim of his book is and what prompted him to write it. In part two, I want him to tell you about the Wall Street Journal's coverage of 9/11 and what made it so unique. And in an extended part three, I'm asking him to tell us some of the many stories he's discovered from his research. But first, Dean, can you briefly tell us who is Dean Rotbart and your own personal experience of that day on 9/11, please?
Well, I'll be delighted to indulge and tell you a little bit about myself. I have ink, printer's ink, that runs through my blood. I'm a dyed-in-the-wool journalist. I attended journalism school, two of them actually, two nice schools, one at Northwestern University. It's called the Medill School of Journalism, and then I had a master's degree from Columbia University. I always wanted to be a journalist, thought I would be a broadcast journalist, but people kept telling me I didn't have the face for being a broadcast journalist. Actually, I got an internship when I was still in college with the Wall Street Journal, and it had not been my ambition to work for a business or financial publication. But as I quickly discovered, and if listeners to this program, viewers of this program, don't know the Wall Street Journal, there's actually quite a bit of quality journalism in there that has absolutely nothing to do with business and financial journalism. And so I worked for the Wall Street Journal. I wrote one of its more stock-moving stock market columns called the Herd on the Street column. And but I always had this entrepreneurial bug. And so eventually I left the Wall Street Journal. I started a professional newsletter and conferencing business about journalism. Oh. And so my readers and subscribers were Fortune 500 companies who wanted to have a better understanding of how news organizations such as CNBC, the Financial Times, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, how they operated. And for many years, that is what I did. It so happens you were talking about you do a lot of traveling. Well, in 2001, 2000, I did a lot of traveling. And part of the traveling that I did is I went around the country, but particularly New York, with a camera crew. And in those days, there were bigger cameras, and you
Yes.
needed an audio person and a producer and a lighting person. And we went around to news organizations, and I interviewed prominent journalists about what they did. And in fact, at that point, I was living and based here in Denver, but I was in New York on September 8th, 2001, interviewing people both at the Wall Street Journal, the Nightly Business Report, which was a television program on the public broadcasting system, other places, and by coincidence left on September 8th of 2001. Many of the sites that we filmed at were destroyed on 9/11. And so it was very jarring in my mind to know that I had been there. And I had spent innumerable hours, Malcolm, in the World Trade Centers as a journalist, interviewing people, having breakfast on the windows on the World Restaurant on the top floor of the World Trade Center. So it hit me very personally 20 years ago.
Yeah. And what do you feel you're going to be like on September the 11th this year? Well,
it's obviously somewhat different because I have now spent, and I'll tell you a little bit about how this book came about, but I've now spent the last 7-8 months with my nose buried in September 11th. And on the face of it, that is a sad, tragic amount of research. But the subtitle of my book is An American Comeback Story.
Yeah.
And really, I tried as much as I could to look for the optimistic silver lining to what on September 11, 2001 was a very, very dark cloud.
Yeah, I understand. Dean, let's move to part one. Your book is called September the 12th, An American Comeback Story. So tell us what the book's about, why the 12th and not the 11th, and what's the aim of the book and what prompted you to write it? I know a bundle of questions I've just given you there, but they're buzzing around in my head, so I needed to get them out.
I will try to remember to answer all of those questions. This was an accidental book, if you will. I have been working and am continuing to work on a biography of the longest serving managing editor of the Wall Street Journal. The gentleman's name is Paul Steiger. He served 16 years at the head of the newspaper, and during that time, among other honors, his team won 16 Pulitzer Prizes.
Wow.
He's the longest serving ever editor of the Wall Street Journal. And then he left the paper and started the news organization ProPublica, which has grown into a global juggernaut. It's a nonprofit investigative news organization. So I set out about a year ago, a little bit more, with his cooperation to write his biography. And I thought to myself, Malcolm, it's going to take me 2 or 3 years to write this, but I don't want to wait 2 or 3 years to begin writing. And so I said, what are some of the easy parts of his life story that I can tell in sort of silos, so that I can write it and be done with it for the most part? And I thought, hugely mistakenly, that 9/11, what he did on 9/11, would be one of those chapters. And so I set about reporting and writing that chapter, thinking it would take me a month or two. In the process of doing that, I came across a cache of hundreds of never published, basically never seen emails and memos between Wall Street Journal, and it's owned by Dow Jones, and Dow Jones people generated on 9/11, talking really almost minute by minute as to what's going on. They thought Paul Steiger, the managing editor, they thought he was dead. No, he was incommunicado. He couldn't reach anybody. So people thought he was dead. The headquarters of the Wall Street Journal and its parent company, Dow Jones, were obliterated. They were located directly across the street from the World Trade Center, and they were obliterated by fallout debris from the World Trade Center. So nobody, imagine a workplace where an hour earlier, everything was normal, and after an hour, everything was gone. completely gone. People couldn't get to their computers. They couldn't get to their desks. They couldn't get to their files. And very importantly, they couldn't communicate with one another. They were scattered throughout the 5 boroughs of Manhattan. Some lived in Connecticut, some lived in New Jersey. It seemed impossible that they would be able to publish a newspaper that for the next morning, the morning of September 12th.
12th, right.
The book tells this truly amazing story of how that edition, the September 12th edition, how it came together and how people who rose to the occasion, if you will. And as you mentioned at the beginning, these were not war correspondents. And yet some of the correspondents for the journal, the day before on September 10th, one of them, a reporter named John Hilsenrath, had been covering academic economics, economic theory, if you will. On 9/11, he was down in the street, walking around and over decapitated bodies, walking in pools of blood. One of the opening chapter of the book talks about his haunting memory of seeing thousands of women's shoes forming a trail from the World Trade Center to the southern tip of Manhattan because women running away ditched their high heel shoes and ran in barefoot. They ran barefoot in order to get away from the encroaching clouds. And so I didn't intend to write the book. I intended to write a biography of Paul Steiger, but I ended up having so much never before seen, rich material telling this story that's never been told of how really ordinary, we think of journalists, we think, well, they're professionals, but these were ordinary men and women who basically said, we're not going to let the terrorists deter us from publishing a next day paper. And so that's why I called it September 12th, because that was the day that the paper came out.
That is absolutely brilliant. And, you know, I'm getting the feeling totally that this is a book that needed to be written.
Well, gosh, thank you. One of the early reviewers basically said, this is a book that needed to be written.
Oh, right. I'm sorry. Yeah.
It is a story that hasn't been told. And Malcolm, what I want, you know, I was aware that it was going to be the 20th anniversary. So I have been racing to have this available ahead of 9/11/2021. But in fact, it is a eternal comeback story.
Yes. Yeah.
This is a story of people unexpectedly who can either respond to a crisis or quit. And these were not quitters. And as I said, it wasn't just reporters and editors. It was composing room people. It was delivery people, union delivery people, non-union delivery people. And they all kind of coalesced around a mission that said, we have got to publish a paper for 2 reasons. We want to reassure our readers that the world will continue, that there will be a next day. And the second reason was to basically thumb their nose, if you will, at terrorists, the terrorists of 9/11 and future terrorists, and say, you can't break us so easily.
Yes. Okay. Dean, before we move to part 2, let me just remind everyone of your URL for the book, your website address for the book, which is, viewers, obviously you can see it on the screen behind me, but for listeners, let me just spell that out. It's all the W's, September -12th. Now remember how to spell the 12th. TWELFHTH. Yes, I know, I keep missing the F out. It's TWELFTH. So that's September-12th.com. Now, when and where can it be bought, Dean?
Okay, so I have, as I'm showing you, and if you have listeners, they won't see it, but I have proof copies. But the actual final copies probably won't be available until mid-August. That's my target. If people want to, they can actually pre-register for it. And I'll give you a www where they can pre-register for it. And it doesn't even obligate them to purchase it. It just means we'll alert them when the book is available. It's at tinyurl.com/pre-register, one word, 091201. So tinyurl.com/pre-register 091201. And they can sign up for the book. And again, when it is available, and it will be widely available, Malcolm, it will certainly be available globally through Amazon and a variety of bookstores. They can sign up, we'll let them know, and then they can purchase it.
And I'm sure that will be a world bestseller as well, Dean. Right. Part two. Tell us about the Wall Street Journal's coverage of 9/11 and what made it so unique. And what lessons can we learn from the journal's performance?
I may not have the number of years correct, but I believe 2001 was the 109th year of publication of the Wall Street Journal. It had never won awards for breaking news because, for the most part, covering Wall Street, there's not such big stories. This was a story that literally developed just outside their front door. And they ended up winning the Pullitzer Prize for breaking news reporting for their reporting. And I think there were two elements to it. One is they actually did a pretty phenomenal job of reporting the story. They had, more than anybody else, they had reporters on the ground who were able to interview eyewitnesses of what was happening. One of the most memorable stories that the Wall Street Journal wrote was a first-person article by its foreign editor, but the foreign editor named John Bussey worked, and he's still with the Wall Street Journal, worked from New York, and he told the story of what his day was like, because when they evacuated the Wall Street Journal's headquarters, he refused to leave. He refused to leave because he was filing live reports. The Wall Street Journal had an arrangement with CNBC. He was filing live reports to CNBC about what he was seeing just outside the window. He could see the World Trade Centers just outside of the windows. And he never imagined that those buildings were going to collapse and he was going to get trapped. So he kept reporting. Security guard came to get him out. A vice president of the company came to chase him out. He refused to leave. Well, he was almost killed. And then he did escape. And he eventually wrote the story of his escape. So some of their content was truly not available to anybody else. Then they began talking. They also had some, and still have, some of the brightest minds when it came to reporting on terrorism and having knowledge of terrorism. And so they had stories in the September 12th edition that now, almost 20 years later, still hold up, talking about who they thought was behind the attacks, and they were correct, it was Al-Qaeda, and talking about how this was likely to change life in America and around the world, what the responses were. So they did two amazing things. They reported their own story, and they perceptively reported what people needed to know the next day. And they did it without a newsroom.
Yeah.
You and I are talking, you're in London. Are you in London?
No, I'm in the northeast of England. Ooh.
You're in the northeast of England.
Yeah.
I'm in almost the Midwest of Denver, and this is easy. But this technology didn't exist in 2001. No. Yeah. Editors couldn't get on Zoom and talk to one another. Nobody had cell phone cameras on 9/11. A few people had Blackberries, but the Blackberries were strictly for texting. Most people who had old-fashioned cell phones, they didn't work. The lines in Lower Manhattan were so either knocked down or overwhelmed that people couldn't talk to one another. And so in an age way before Twitter and Facebook and Zoom, through initiative and determination, the very dispersed staff of the Wall Street Journal, working from homes, one reporter who couldn't get any place convinced a primary school to let him work from their offices and reported and filed reports from there. Another reporter who I talk about in the book ended up going to Massachusetts and the children's magazine, Highlights for Children, and they gave her a desk and a phone. So she would call up people and she would say, "This is Ianthe Dugan with the Wall Street Journal." And they would say, "Well, why are you calling from the children's magazine, Highlights for Children?" I mean, that's how people had to come up with, with bubble gum and rubber band solutions to get the paper out, but they did.
Fantastic. It's that resolve of all working together, because as you and I discussed before we went live, both of us, obviously we've had a UK newspaper background there, and getting people to work together in newspapers was not easy with union and non-union, you say. But suddenly it just shows that camaraderie is there, that you can't kill it, can you?
No. And Malcolm, I think a lot of your viewers and listeners have an interest in business and management. I do for 10 years now, I have done a weekly podcast. It's called Monday Morning Radio. And my listeners, some 60,000 plus, are basically business owners and founders and C-suite executives. And what I found, and it was, again, unexpected, was that there is an incredible management story in my book, September 12th. And the management story is that if the management at Dow Jones and the Wall Street Journal had not been excellent, and excellent for years, it was in their DNA, then they could never have put out a paper on September 12th, because part of what management did before 9/11 is it empowered people to make their own decisions. It empowered people to take risks. They didn't need that. They could have access, but they didn't need to talk to a more senior editor, a supervisor, to act. And so even though people couldn't talk to their editors on 9/11, they couldn't reach there was no main newsroom to reach, they took it upon themselves. They said, I feel confident that management will back me. I'm going to make crucial decisions. And so there's a real good management lesson in this.
Yeah. And also that management must have been extremely proud of their people, extremely proud. My final part, Dean, part 3, has no question. I'd just like you to tell us some of the many stories that you discovered from your research.
Well, there are many, many awesome stories. Let me tell you a few. I just mentioned management. And again, management couldn't be reached. The chairman of the board of Dow Jones, Peter Kahn, in 2001, was in Hong Kong, which was 12 hours ahead, and really couldn't do anything. I told you, the managing editor, Paul Steiger, was MIA. He was missing in action. He had been caught up in the debris storm and couldn't reach anybody by phone. In Manhattan, one of Paul Steiger's administrative assistants, who was a former copy editor, night copy editor, was a gentleman named Jim Pancero. I need to cough for a second, Malcolm. How do I do that?
You need go and just keep coughing.
Sorry, I have.
No, hey, this is what's called human life these days, isn't it?
I have summer allergies, and I've tried to I tried to take some allergy medicine. But let me tell you about Jim Pancero. So he was basically a newsroom administrator. On the morning of 9/11, before the World Trade Centers collapsed, but after the Twin Towers had been hit by planes, and Paul Steiger was still in the newsroom, he asked Jim Pancero to try to make his way to a printing plant and administrative facility 50 miles from Manhattan in New Jersey, South Brunswick, New Jersey, and set up a shop there, set up a pop-up makeshift newsroom. Well, so here's this guy, Jim Pancero. He'd been with the paper a long time, but basically he was an administrator who on 9/11 de facto became the managing editor, because nobody else was there to step in and fill the shoes of the missing managing editor. So he assigned stories. He coordinated with the layout people, the copy editors, the printing desk. He helped set up the entire arrangement of what would go where in the paper. He was really an amazing person who, for one day, it was like being king for the day, for one day ran the whole paper.
Wow.
When the Wall Street Journal won its Pulitzer Prize, and it accepted it in April of 2002, they selected Jim Pancero the administrative executive to the managing editor to be the one who went up and accepted. So that's one fascinating story. I'll tell you another story. There on the Wall Street Journal is well known not just for its business and financial coverage, but for its conservative editorial and arts and leisure page. It's been, and that page has won multiple Pulitzer Prizes over the years. On 9/11, there was a copy editor on the leisure and arts page, a guy named Philip Connors. Philip normally, most days, moseyed into the office 10 or 10:30 and would copy edit book reviews, essays, other what I would call feature or soft news. He was riding into Manhattan on September 11th on the train, no particular rush to get into the city, and saw what looked like industrial smokestacks in the distance. It was the two flaming World Trade Center towers. So he knew he had to get, he said to himself, I've got to get to the office. It's going to be crazy today. I can help out. Keep in mind, he's not a hard news reporter. He's not even a news feature editor. He's a leisure and arts page editor. So he gets as far as the train will go, and then they force everybody off. This was a somewhat common experience. They certainly wouldn't let trains go to Lower Manhattan. He went to multiple police lines, showed his press credentials to get through, and they basically said, I don't care if you're the president of the United States, we're not going to let you, you cannot go through. And so he found a subway station, the entrance to a subway station that was roped off with police tape. And he went under the police tape, he went down into the station. There was a subway car empty, half in the station, half out of the station. He crawled down onto the tracks. He felt his way along the tracks, headed south towards headquarters, found a dust mask that he could put over his face to help him cope with the air, walked along, stayed away from the third electrified rail, walked through the subway tunnels, eventually surfaced. By the time he surfaced, he was right near the Wall Street Journal's headquarters and right across from the World Trade Centers, which had collapsed. The police and emergency people were so occupied with what was going on, he was able to sneak into a back entrance to the building, climb 9 flights of stairs up to the newsroom, and there was not a soul in the newsroom. It was 2 hours after the building had been evacuated, and Philip Connors, dedicated, wanting to help, wanting to be involved, climbed his way in and up. Again, pretty amazing story. This is not a hardened war correspondent. This was someone, and then he said to himself, really a fascinating story, that he finally realized when he was in the building, he said, sort of like, what am I doing? This building could collapse. It could fill with gas. I could be trapped here. No one would ever find me. No one would ever know. But he still took the time to email his editors and colleagues to say, I'm in the newsroom. Is there anything that you need? I can bring it with me when I exit the newsroom. So again, some pretty amazing stories in terms of what people experienced.
Yeah. Do you know this, the newspaper that got out on the 12th, was it a full edition, full pagination? So
this is the first section. If you, again, for audio listeners, it is the headline. This is the Wednesday, September 12, 2001 edition. The headline is Terrorists Destroy World Trade Center, Hit Pentagon in Raid with Hijacked Jets. It was 2 sections, a total of 34 pages, which was roughly half of what it would have been. If 9/11 had not had the terrorist attacks, the September 12th edition would have been 64 pages, something like that. One of the reasons it was smaller was they pulled most of the ads. They thought that their advertisers wouldn't really want to be hawking their financial services or their new cars or whatever it was in such a somber edition. But they did put it out. The journal's circulation in 2001 was approximately 1.8 million. They managed to deliver to all but about 150,000 of their subscribers on September 12th. And of course, the tragic part of it is that most of the papers that they didn't deliver would have gone to people who perished in the World Trade Center or whose offices were destroyed in the neighborhood of the World Trade Center. I'll tell you one more quick story because cat lovers will like it. Two journal reporters lived right across the street from the World Trade Center in something called Gateway Tower. They so they not only worked in the vicinity, but they lived there. And on 9/11, they evacuated successfully and made their way to the Upper East Side of Manhattan, but they had to leave behind their cat. This was, I think, a 14-year-old cat. Wow. And a good friend of theirs had to leave behind two cats. So they plotted a rescue mission on 9/12. And on 9/12, again, they couldn't use their press credentials or other things to get past the police lines. They wanted to go back and get their cat. But they just so happened they didn't have any clothes. So they were staying at a colleague's home, and it was a woman who was the colleague, but her husband had large shirts. So they put on large white shirts. They stopped by and they picked up air masks, to filter out the air. And when they got down towards Lower Manhattan, journalists started coming up to them and saying, "Are you medics? Can we interview you?" And they told the journalists, "No, we're not medics." But then they realized that they looked like medics. And so they walked right past the police lines. The police clearly assumed that they were medics. They made their way to their apartment complex. 10 floors, they walked up 10 floors. All of the doors had been blown open. So the doors to their apartment was open. They feared their cat was dead. They went inside and the cat was sitting in the middle of their living room, meowing at them as if to say, "Where were you? What's taking you so long?" Then they went to their friend's house. They got his two cats. He had cat carriers. So they put the three cats in a cat carrier, two women. By this time, they're very dusty and dirty, pushing a shopping cart with their cats in it. And that's how they rescued their cats. And they basically pointed out that on any other day, they would have looked like, street people, homeless people pushing cats through Manhattan. No one would have ever mistaken them for top quality Wall Street Journal reporters. But they used creativity. They used some of the pluck of a journalist to rescue their cats.
Dean, what fantastic stories, fantastic stories. Ladies and gentlemen, viewers and listeners, as we found out today, there's always a story beneath the story. 9/11 was awful, and we all hope it will never happen again. But as Dean says, there's many lessons to be learned and many tributes to be made. Don't miss getting his book, September the 12th, An American Comeback Story. Thanks, Dean. An honor to have you as a guest.
An honor to be a guest. Thank you, Malcolm.